Hi, everyone. I am Allison Zach, and I'm thrilled that you are tuning in to my presentation on incorporating yoga and mindfulness into environmental education programs. I'm going to try to hit on stuff for children and adults both, but I will skew a little bit towards kids. And I hope you've had your lunch. So I'm going to get started. Like Kit said, we're going to have the chat enabled for the first part of the presentation, but that doesn't mean that I am not eager to answer your questions. And so we're going to enable it again later in the presentation. And if I don't have time to get to your questions, I will definitely, there'll be ways that you can contact me. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Allison Zach. I am the Education Associate at the Clifton Institute. We are an environmental nonprofit in Northern Virginia. And we have a three-part mission. One of those parts is environmental education, but we also do ecological research and habitat restoration on our 900 acres of property. And I am the educator there. I'm also a 200-hour certified yoga teacher through Yoga Alliance and a yoga teacher at the Sun and Moon Yoga Studio in Fairfax, Virginia. And a couple of other things about me. I, in my past career, was a field primatologist, which will become relevant a little bit later. And I call myself, at this point, an almost anthropologist. I have degrees, bachelor's and master's degrees in anthropology. But I became an environmental educator because I felt like my work in anthropology in the academic world wasn't being applied enough. And also an almost anthropologist because I really like to combine science, social science, arts, spirituality, and all kinds of stuff that I mush together. So finally, two fun facts about me. I'm a beaver believer and a pawpaw enthusiast. So that part is just for fun. So to kick things off, we are going to start off right away with trying a simple activity that I have done with 6-year-olds and I have done with adults. I'm going to teach you a mudra, which if you're not familiar with yoga or what a mudra is, it's a symbolic gesture that's practiced with the hands and fingers. When I explain it to children, I just kind of call it yoga for the hands. And I'm gonna encourage you all, so I'm actually set up right now so that I'm sitting on the floor. And if you'd like to really earnestly try this mudra with me, you can grab a seat on the floor next to your desk, or if you're outside, that's even better. But all we're gonna do is sit, if you're able, just crisscross on the ground and lengthen your spine. Reach the crown of your head up towards the sky, even if it's beyond a few ceilings, like mine is. And you're going to show your peace fingers here. So when I do this activity with children, we use the analogy to an electrical socket. So I'll actually begin a session asking the children what their favorite video or computer games are, and then on what devices they play those games. And how those devices get their energy or get their battery life, right? And of course, we plug it into a charger and it gets electricity. With our fingers, our two peace fingers here in Bhu Mudra, we are going to receive our own energy and the things that we need to function and be healthy and happy from the earth. So of course, this is ideally done outside, like right on the ground with your butt in the grass. Most of us, that's probably not practical right now. So we're going to just imagine that. And so with your two fingers, I have students stretch their arms out from the shoulders at first, and then simply let your arms float down until the spot on the ground where your tips of your two fingers hit the ground. And that's the place where you're gonna plug into the earth. And so close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so. And just take a minute here of natural, easy breathing, ideally in and out through the nose. And just imagine yourself being charged or inspired or healed or whatever it is you need from the earth through your connection with your two fingertips. And if you're participating, we'll take one big deep breath in and a big breath out through the mouth. You can open your eyes, shake out your hands, shake out your legs, and maybe hop back in your chair. So thanks for participating with me in that quick little example. You can see how it can be adapted in so many different ways for lots of different age groups. It can be much longer and involve visualizations or meet any of the needs that you need it to, but that's just something simple I wanted to start you off with. So I'm going to define a couple of the obvious terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation today. I just use Y and M as an acronym for yoga and mindfulness because that's kind of a mouthful. And I'll first draw your attention to the bottom corner of the slide where it says, when you work out and gotta do quiet. And these were two responses from when I asked some of my pre-K students, what is yoga? And they were there for an environmental program, but I was also introducing some yoga into the program. And I was just struck by how limited the kids' views were about yoga. So maybe they'd seen their parents do it. If they knew what it was at all, they perceived of yoga as being either just a physical exercise or something that's very quiet and serious. And so right off the bat, I just want to inspire you all as environmental educators to like break through those barriers and those preconceived ideas about what yoga is and can be, especially outside and learning about nature. It's more than just a physical thing, and it's way more than being quiet and serious, as I'll talk about more a little bit later. So yoga comes from a Sanskrit word, which means to yoke or to unify or reconcile opposing forces. That's pretty vague, but it's kind of vague on purpose. Those opposing forces can be a lot of different things depending on who you are and what your situation is. A couple of common examples of those two opposing forces would be mind and body, or your movements and your breath. And then I also would like to point out that when we use the word yoga here in the US and here in the West in general, we're usually actually referring to asana, which is the posture practice of yoga. That's the physical part where we're moving our bodies with our breath. But yoga is actually a larger system with 8 different limbs, and the physical practice called asana is only one of those 8 limbs of yoga. In the italics here is kind of just a little example of a way that I might describe yoga to a group of children. We practice yoga when we move our bodies and breathe to learn more about ourselves, life, and the world around us. And then mindfulness, I think, can just really simply be defined as awareness of the present moment. An important addition to that might be without judgment. And often I just simply describe it as remembering the present. Again, for children, I might say mindfulness is when we pay attention to where we are and what we're doing right now. So in my kind of literature search on this topic, what I have done here is just as an example, I have made a Venn diagram with yoga and mindfulness. So think of this as benefits to practicing yoga and mindfulness, and then benefits to participating in outdoor education programs. And I just have literally a fraction or a handful of some of the benefits that I found in the literature to be overlapping between these two things, Y&M and EE, if you will. And the main point that I gathered from this is that yoga and mindfulness and outdoor education have benefits for all ages, that's definitely in the literature, and for holistic health of an individual and often for communities as well. So we're not just talking about physical health or mental health, but for the well-being of a human, which is why I'm so inspired by both of these spheres. So my own interpretation in practice of those two spheres is what I call nature yoga. And I define that as an approach that uses locally relevant nature-related poses and other mindfulness activities to share information about the natural world and to reinforce concepts of human interdependence and connection with all other beings and the earth itself. And my goal in using nature yoga and incorporating that into outdoor programs is to help students of all ages connect to nature in mindful and meaningful ways. And with this goal and definition in mind, I developed 3 C's of nature yoga. So this is something that I'll introduce at the beginning of a yoga session with children, and we close with that as well. But the 3 C's are curiosity, compassion, and connection. And I'm sure none of these are surprising to you as environmental educators, and I will kind of give more examples for those as we go on. I also want to add here that I don't mean to sound like a hipster, but I was doing nature yoga outside before COVID forced people to do yoga outside. So there were benefits of that before the pandemic. And I also want to add that I'm not trying to brand this as my own thing. I'm not claiming to have invented a new concept. I'm just sharing the way that I integrate these 2 things. I'm happy to share all of my resources and ideas freely, as I think we do in the environmental ed community anyway, because we all have the same common goals. So the next few slides, I'm going to just kind of walk you through a little bit of an example of a sequence of some nature yoga poses. You will see that I have renamed some of the poses. So each pose has a name that is locally relevant to the area in which I work. If you practiced yoga already, you probably know that lots of yoga poses are named after animals, but a lot of the animals are species that your students may never encounter in the wild. And so by renaming these poses to highlight regional species and landscapes, we can make yoga more relevant, and we can encourage those connections to nature on a more personal level. So you'll see that I renamed cat pose here bobcat pose. And you'll also notice that on each slide, I'm sharing the Sanskrit name of each pose as well. So I'm going to flip through these kind of quickly, but just so you get a little idea here, this is child's pose or balasana, and it becomes snail pose. We make a lot of slime trails here. This is hare pose, traditionally known as hare pose, but became cottontail rabbit pose. So you can see how I'm trying not to completely change anything. This is mantis pose, a lot of dynamic arm and neck movements here in this high lunge or crescent pose. Chair pose or Utkatasana becomes kingfisher pose, one of my favorite birds. And one I think that really actually kind of resembles the shape that the body makes. But that's another fun thing to discuss with kids. Why is this pose named kingfisher pose? Here's flying squirrel pose. Warrior 1 and 2 become buck and doe pose. So an opportunity to kind of discuss why sometimes we have different names for animals with different sexes. I don't use just animals. I've got yoga poses named after plants, yoga poses named after fungi, lichen, you name it. I probably have a pose for it if it's in my area. And I will be sharing, so I think I've already given access to the PDF through my session on the Huva app, but there are a lot more where these come from. Here's one of my favorite poses and one of my favorite animals. This one, kids or adults, doesn't matter, is always accompanied by a visualization of beavers swimming in and out of the entrance to the lodge between the person's arms. Here's Malasana, which is actually squat, but I renamed it frog pose because that's a pretty intuitive one for kids. Box turtle pose, more commonly known as bridge pose, but a great opportunity to talk about the parts of a shell and which parts of your body make the plastron and the carapace. This one this was already fish pose, and I made it more specific to a species found in the ponds right next to where I'm usually practicing yoga. And then you're probably familiar with Shavasana, which is the final resting pose in yoga. Shavasana actually means corpse pose, and that's not a term that I use with kids that often. I've renamed it Piedmont Prairie pose. Of course, you can think of anything that reminds you of peaceful relaxation for your personal Shavasana. So this is a really important slide that I think really, for me, gets at the inspire change theme of this whole conference and how this relates to yoga and EE. It's very important to me as a yoga teacher that I'm honoring the roots of the yoga practice. And so on this slide are a couple of suggestions for areas to educate yourself before you share yoga with others, and then things also to share with your students as you begin teaching or as you continue teaching if you're already doing so. And the first thing is that the origin of yoga is in India and South Asia. I try to get my information from other South Asian teachers. And there's a movement right now, Decolonize Yoga, which is making that a lot easier to do. I'm happy to share resources for that at the end. Also, I do my best to study the Sanskrit terminology and pronounce the terms as best that I can. It may come up as you're incorporating yoga into your programs about the relationship between yoga and religion. And while I can comfortably say that yoga is not a religion, I also do want to acknowledge the fact that it's influenced by cultural traditions with links to existing religions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and other religions. Also, I think it's important to familiarize yourself with the concept of cultural appropriation, which is taking an aspect of a culture that's not your own and using it for your own personal gain. This is particularly harmful when the people of that culture are not benefiting from their culture being used in a way and someone else is profiting from it. Again, I have a lot of resources to share on this. I won't go too deep into it because of its connection to EE, but I think it's important for anyone teaching yoga to just familiarize yourself with that. And then also something I've been studying a lot lately is the history of yoga and people's relationships to nature who either practice or teach yoga throughout time. And one of the ways that I introduce this concept with my students is to talk about the mountain ranges. So I will explain that yoga comes from India, where the Himalayan mountains are the tallest and youngest mountains in the world. And then I'll ask, well, what mountains are near us right now and where we're practicing? And kids will say either the Appalachians or the Blue Ridge Mountains. And those are some of the oldest and shortest mountains in the world. But isn't it neat how both of these mountain ranges are important for people, plants, and animals, and how the practice of yoga has traveled across the world to help people connect with nature. So that's just a quick example of how I might do that with students. So the way I see it, there are two approaches to incorporating yoga and mindfulness into environmental education programs. The first is, of course, to create programs with that as the sole focus. And I'll give you some examples of how I've done that. But the second, and probably the more popular approach, is to incorporate elements of yoga and mindfulness into existing programs. So I encourage you all to reflect on what programs you're already doing that might be a great opportunity to introduce some of these elements. Don't make it too hard on yourself. This is something that can happen slowly and over time. So I'm going to share some examples of that with you as well. For the first approach, these are the programs that I have created that are explicitly about yoga and mindfulness. So I have a family animal yoga class at the Clifton Institute where it's exactly what it sounds like. Families come. We set up outside and they're all ages present, and we're doing animal and nature yoga. I also have monthly nature yoga classes just for adults. So that one looks more like a traditional yoga class that would occur inside a studio for adults, but it's occurring outside on our property, and there are always nature themes woven throughout the class. And then finally, I started a program series over a year ago now called Mindful Naturalists, where we experiment kind of each month with different mindfulness practices. And there's always a natural history element and a mindfulness element. So some examples of that are barefoot walking, which is exactly what it sounds like. Birding like Buddha is one of the favorites that I've done because at the risk of sounding a little critical of birders, I think it's not the most mindful thing. They're seeing a bird and checking it off and running to see another bird. But in our program, Birding Like Buddha, I encouraged participants to really prioritize connecting with a single individual bird. And that only worked, by the way, in wintertime when we had waterfowl out on our ponds. That would be impossible during certain times of the year. But hiking meditation, for example, was a combination of walking meditation and hiking, of course. I will also say here that I am not an expert in teaching all of these mindfulness practices. The way that I introduce them to my adult students is to say, I'm facilitating this. I've tried it myself and practiced it myself, but I'm not an expert, and I'm going to participate along with you. And then the Songs of Dusk one, which is the picture here with the American woodcock, we have woodcock habitat on our property where every March they do the courtship displays. And we've had an annual program at the Clifton Institute for years before I started working there, where we would just sit out at dusk and observe the woodcock. But my colleague and I were inspired to do the Songs of Dusk program because we found it amazingly peaceful just to sit out at dusk, even when the woodcocks aren't there. And that became a popular mindful naturalist program. So that's an example of how you can tweak something that you're already doing, and boom, you have a mindfulness program. So these are some examples from approach number 2, which is certainly something I do more often. This is kind of integrating yoga and or mindfulness into existing programs. I do this a lot with my pre-K students. So I have a program called Piedmont Polywogs, which is monthly, and we're always learning about a different nature theme. And I incorporate yoga when I can and when it's appropriate. So if we're learning about trees, like in the picture on the bottom left, we might do tree pose and that's it. Or we were learning about swans the other day, and we invented our own yoga pose for how a swan is feeding in the water when it tips upside down. And that was really fun for the kids, but that's the only yoga pose that we did. Weatherstones are on the bottom right here. Some of you may use Weatherstones already, but it's an opportunity, I think, for a very mindful moment of observation for pre-K students and just feeling what the weather is like today, right where they are, right in that moment. And I will share resources with everyone. I wrote a blog post about exactly how I facilitate that. And I couldn't resist including one of the collective haiku that I've done with my pre-K students. It is geese swimming together, black and white, drinking yucky water. So that was after, of course, a mindful moment of us all observing some geese in the water. And then I prompted them and then wrote the haiku with their own words. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with the concept of the sit spot. And so if you already teach nature journaling, so easy to incorporate mindful elements intentionally into nature journaling programs. And I will say that our summer camp programs, we always do 20 minutes of yoga every single morning of our summer camps. So that's something that we integrate into that program. Here are some teaching tips. Number 1 is to prioritize safety, especially when yoga is concerned. You know, you're working with someone's like physical body. There are risks involved for people's safety. And that's when knowing what you're doing is important, having practiced it yourself, having done your research so that you're keeping everyone safe. I'll give a little more example of that later. Another big one for me is encouraging students to think beyond commonly held perceptions about wildlife. I have a little picture of a turtle on this slide to remind me to use that as the example. You know, we think about turtles, oh, they withdraw into their shell. And I think sometimes we can get stuck in just thinking, oh yeah, turtles go into their shell, but what is it like to be a turtle? Like, what other parts of turtle being are also worth talking about or also worth trying to embody in your mindfulness or yoga practice? Or, you know, another good example would be butterflies and metamorphosis. Yes, they change into something beautiful, but like, let's go a little bit deeper into that. What's the experience of a caterpillar? These are things that I think lend themselves really well to yoga and mindfulness. And then stray away from your yoga mat if you even have access to mats. My students at the Clifton Institute don't have yoga mats, they have a towel. But basically, I think that even if you're outside and you have a towel, not getting people off into the grass is a missed opportunity. Do not limit yourself to that little rectangle that we're so often confined to in a yoga studio. And then specifically tips for kids, never underestimate them. Wow, it just got really dark in here. Never underestimate kids. Kids can do Shavasana. They might not do it for as long as adults. They might not close their eyes, but that doesn't matter. They're still receiving the benefits of that relaxation out in nature. Use lots of music, sound and dynamic movement. Yoga doesn't have to be this quiet, serious thing. There's like, my kids are like some of the loudest ever when we're doing yoga. We shout hello to the sun, we make animal sounds, like do that as much as you want to. And invent your own poses. If you are using picture books to help you facilitate and teach poses to children, it's a wonderful resource. I'll recommend a few of my favorites, but have a helper with you to hold the book and maybe even read the book as you're demonstrating the poses and doing them with the children. And just be silly, laugh a lot, and have fun. Some potential challenges of incorporating yoga and mindfulness. Again, I put safety on this slide, and I give the example of the shoulder stand, which I do call sleepy bat pose, as an example of this. This is a pose that children can do pretty easily and are eager to do. Adults, not so much, maybe aren't interested in doing this pose, but it is one where there are risks to the head and the neck and the spine if you're doing this pose the wrong way, or even if you're doing it on not a firm enough surface. So I will not actually have kids do this pose in the grass like I am in this photo, because it's not safe for them. So these are the things to just do your research on and be really responsible about your participants' safety. You'll also have mixed audiences, and by this I mean that you will have a variety. If kids are there for an environmental program, let's say, you're going to have a variety of interest and pre-exposure to yoga or the idea of yoga. So there's always a kid who says, I hate yoga. And then there's always a kid who knows all the real pose names and is telling you, no, that's not bobcat pose, that's cat pose. So you're going to be managing that, but it's fun. And you're exposing any kid in that audience to something new and to doing it outside if they've done it before. You don't need to have access to the outdoors to do these programs. Nature yoga, you can do them all indoors. I teach this stuff in yoga studios as well, so don't let that stop you from trying to incorporate these things. You can do it at home, you can do it in a classroom, you can do it from indoors, no problem. Know your community. This one is in here because I personally have struggled. My organization is in a more rural county, and there's not a lot of interest, especially right away, with yoga and mindfulness programs. So I am slowly working towards getting the numbers up at our programs and reaching out to people in the community who might be hesitant about attending a mindfulness or a yoga program, and sharing the benefits of that. And so knowing your community will help you promote your programs and their benefits. You might be also worried about your own limited knowledge about yoga and mindfulness. Maybe you're not a certified yoga teacher, but I don't believe that means you cannot incorporate some of these things as long as you do your homework. I was teaching yoga for kids before I was certified in environmental programs. Think carefully about the terminology that you use. Rewilding is one that I'm like a little iffy about. It has a couple of definitions, but of course I'm referring to more on the individual emotional level of nature connection. I don't like the prefix re there. I think it implies that we are totally disconnected from the wild or our wildness, and I don't necessarily think that that's true. So while I love that concept, I might not use the term rewilding itself. And because I've shared with you all that I'm a primatologist in my previous life, I also have issues with the term monkey mind, because I think it does not give enough credit at all to the primate mind in general and our capacity for awe and compassion and all these things. So the way that that term is traditionally used in the mindfulness community, I don't use it that way. And in fact, I have written I've written a primatologist response. So, and then program evaluation is of course so important. I am in the very early stages myself of figuring out informal ways to do program evaluation in yoga and mindfulness programs. If anyone out there has ideas for this, I would love to chat with you. I have also found one particular resource really valuable, and I'm going to share that on an upcoming slide. So here are some of my favorite resources for teaching yoga and mindfulness for children. A couple of these in the bottom left are actually decks of cards with either mindfulness activities or just yoga poses on them. Some of them are picture books you can actually read aloud to kids. Yoga, shout out to Yoga Frog. I love Yoga Frog. And some of these, even Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, but it is a great resource with a definitely a mindful tone to it, I think. And then here are some other books more with adults in mind, and also just kind of educating yourself about yoga and mindfulness and nature and the connection between all of those things. So there are a couple of yoga philosophy classics down in the bottom left corner. And in the top right is a great book if you want to incorporate more nature themes into existing yoga classes for adults, and some other great resources there. Here are a few more. So the PDF at the top, you should already have access to, but Kit, if you want to enable the chat now, that would be great. You all can throw in your questions or your email address so that I can, I'll actually, if you do put your email address into the chat, I can send everyone an email with links to kind of all these things that I've been mentioning. And if you have a question, you can also include your email so I can respond to you directly. And the program evaluation resource that I was referring to on this page is the Practitioner Guide to Assessing Connection to Nature, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. I actually learned about it last year at this very conference, and it's a wonderful resource. And you can download the PDF for free at the NAAE website. So my conclusions, be as locally relevant as you can to, again, encourage that really personal connection between your students of any age and nature. Be creative and follow your own interests. Some of my favorite, most successful programs are the ones that felt almost a little self-indulgent because I was just too excited and too passionate about them. Practice what you teach. We kind of discussed this already, but always keep learning. Even if you're a yoga teacher, you're always still a student, and that's really important. And notice who you're learning from. You know, don't underestimate the power of a single mindful moment. No matter what program I'm teaching, we are always standing outside quiet for at least a minute. And it's really powerful. It's often students' most favorite thing about our program, whether that was the point or not. Always be yourself. You don't need to put on a fake yoga teacher voice or like not crack jokes if that's usually your style. It's definitely something that I do. Even in adult yoga classes, you don't need to be someone different just to teach yoga or mindfulness. And finally, never doubt that there is a way to connect science and spirituality because everything is interconnected. And I believe that, and that's why to me, these things just can go so well together, although it takes a little bit of work and a little bit of research and a little bit of passion. So what I would like to do is now, if you've got a question you want to get in the chat, now is a great time to do so. If you would like to, I'm going to go through a short guided meditation right now of loving kindness. So this is something that I do with adults. It's my own personal take on the loving kindness or metta meditation from the Buddhist tradition. And if you're familiar already with loving kindness meditation, you will, it will be familiar to you, but the order of it is reversed. And the reason why I kind of rewrote this meditation is because I felt like it was too human-centric and did not include other than human beings. So if you would like to participate in that, we're going to just come back to a nice comfy seated position with a long tall spine. You can be in your chair for this, no problem. Just kind of have your feet flat on the floor and your hands can rest in your lap. Close your eyes. Relax your face, your jaw, your hips. It's where we hold a lot of tension. And just breathe in and out through your nose if possible. And just picture the earth, our beautiful planet. And try to just think about all the amazing beings living on our planet right now in this moment. And if you're already feeling challenged by that, you're doing this right. We're going to cultivate loving kindness for the earth and all living beings with 3 affirmations, which you can repeat in your mind or out loud if your mic is still on mute, or you can just concentrate on their meaning. And those 3 affirmations are, may all beings and the earth be healthy and safe. May all beings and the earth feel happy and at peace. And may all beings and the earth be free from suffering. Now imagine a non-human being or group of non-human beings with which you have a difficult, complex, or maybe conflicting relationship. So maybe a mosquito that bit you yesterday, or your neighbor's dog who barked all night, maybe poison ivy, or maybe even the products of an animal that you use or consume. And we'll wish them loving kindness too. So with that being in mind, may you be healthy and safe. May you feel happy and at peace. May you be free from suffering. Now imagine a neutral non-human being, a creature you neither love nor struggle to love. Maybe some grass in a sidewalk crack, a cow you drove by on the side of the road, a bird singing outside. And to that being, we'll wish, may you be healthy and safe. May you feel happy and at peace. May you be free from suffering. Next, recall a non-human being that you love. Maybe it's the tree that you used to climb in your parents' backyard or a beloved pet. This one should be easy. May you be healthy and safe. May you feel happy and at peace. May you be free from suffering. Finally, bring your attention to yourself. For some people, this is the hardest part. Really wish this for yourself. May I be healthy and safe. May I feel happy and at peace. May I be free from suffering. And if it feels strange or even selfish to end with yourself, remember that all beings and the earth are not separate from ourselves. They are us. Take one more deep inhale. Exhale through the mouth. Gently open your eyes. And I rushed through that, but hopefully it was still meaningful for you. And you can see how I flipped the normal order of the loving kindness meditation. If you've done that before, it's usually human beings that we're wishing loving kindness toward. So here's all my millions of ways you can contact me: my email address, my website, my Twitter handle, my Instagram, and I would like to end like I do a yoga class with any age. Again, is Anjali Mudra, which is to put your hands together at your heart, and we say, I am curious, I am compassionate, I am connected. Thank you all so much. I know that we are like right now perfectly out of time, but if you have sent me a question in the chat, I will respond to you if your email is in there. And I can also stick around for a little bit. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Oh wait, there is my horrendous references slide. Does anyone have any questions? I see one here from Dana about the order of the loving kindness meditation. You have probably always done it in the reverse order, and I thought it was actually really powerful to end with yourself because of that realization that ourselves are actually all beings. That was my own personal touch to it. If you didn't like it, that's cool too. And you can keep doing it the traditional way. Oh, the 3 statements I finished my class with, I'll repeat those. That was a question. I am curious, I am compassionate, and I am connected. I do not end my classes with namaste like a lot of yoga classes, and there's reasons for that that are connected to the kind of decolonized yoga movement. I'm happy to send resources and more information about that. Do you feel this works in a virtual format? I don't, all of my yoga classes that I teach with kids, even in the time of COVID, are in person. So they're entirely outside. I have actually never taught kids yoga or mindfulness via Zoom, and I would certainly be a little concerned to do so. It can be done, I have seen it done, but especially the way kids are using screens for so many other things now, I think the real benefit here is getting outside and being outside where it's safer, you don't need a mask, and doing it that way. I'm trying to scroll through and see any other questions. If you have to go, please do. Thank you so much for being here.